Welcome to Advanced Fishing and Outdoor. Today I'm going to focus on 5 tips for successful early spring Chinook fishing on the Columbia River. Now, spring Chinook salmon on the Columbia are some of the world's most desirable table fare. They're prized for their high fat content and their rich flavor, but they are a challenge to catch. And in this video, I will cover 5 tips that will help you to be successful to catch Columbia River spring Chinook. Tip number 1, when trolling, you want a slow presentation. Early on, the water's cold. These fish, they're lazy, they're lethargic. They're trying to conserve as much energy as they possibly can. Remember, these fish, they don't spawn until late August into September. And so they're not going to expend or waste energy unnecessarily. So when trolling, you want to go as slow as you can go and still maintain a spin of your gear. So if you're trolling herring, for example, go as slow as you can where you're still able to maintain that slow spin of your herring. And also during most of the tide, be aware that, and yes, tide affects the Columbia River all the way up to Bonneville Dam. The fish are going to be hugging the bottom of that river. Now, during the high tide, sometimes they will come up a little bit because the flow has decreased. But for the majority of the tide, they'll be hugging the bottom. Their bellies will be right on the bottom. So that means that when you're trolling, you want to be near the bottom. Otherwise, you're not going to be in the zone and you're not going to hook fish. Tip number 2, consider bait when it's cold and consider hardware when the water temperature goes up. Generally speaking, these fish don't bite till the water temperature gets to around 42 degrees. And in that 42 to 50 degree range, bait has the advantage. Bait is king. Now, when the water gets up into the 50s, then things like quick fish usually are more effective. And many people will fish on anchor with quick fish in that temperature range. And as the temperature approaches the upper 50s and into the 60s, then spinners can be very effective. But with the early spring, when we're talking about in March, usually the first week of April till it's open. It usually shuts down on the Columbia River around that first week of April. When the water temperature is really cold, bait is king. Tip number 3, depth to target. Now, in years with high water, get shallow near the bank. In that 10-foot range, sometimes even a little shallower, especially if the water turbidity is way up. Now, in low water conditions, when the water is very clear, normally they will run deeper. So you want to target the 20 to 35 foot range on average. Now, there's a caveat to this. On sunny days, clear water with a lot of boat traffic, it will spook these fish and they will go deeper, even down into the 40 to 45 foot depth of water in the river. So you want to, they want to get out of that boat traffic. Now, if you're a weekend fisherman, when it's busy on the water, keep that in mind, especially on those sunny days when that water is clear. Now, if you find these tips and others on my channel helpful, please consider giving it a thumbs up and subscribing. Thank you. Tip number 4, cleanliness. Clean your gear. Keeping as much as the human scent off your lures is always a good practice for all fish species. But salmon in particular, they can smell 1 part per billion. So any weird smell, you don't want that. The standard go-to for years is Lemon Joy liquid soap. Use this to clean your flashers, your quick fish, your spinners, all of that hardware that's going to go into the water. Now, can you catch fish if you don't clean things? Well, yeah, every blind squirrel finds a nut. But consistent salmon fishermen clean their gear to minimize off scents that might make the difference between catching and going home skunked. So clean your gear. Now, tip number 5, when getting bit, leave your rod in the rod holder. Too many people make the mistake of taking the rod, putting it into their hands too early, and they end up ripping it out of the fish's mouth. Now, if you watch some of my underwater live sonar footage on my channel, you'll see that these fish many times will sit there and mouth the herring. And that being the case, if you pull the rod out too quickly, you're going to rip that right out of the fish's mouth. So do not take the rod out of the rod holder until the rod bends over and is loaded up. At that point, then you can go get the rod, set the hook, and you'll have that fish. So those are the 5 tips to help you be successful this spring when targeting Columbia River Spring Chinook. Now with patience and time, you will get one of these prized fish. And we'll see you out on the water. Take care now.